My friend was dating a girl in the next town over. She was part of a group we've hung out with over there. Our towns were separated by about 10 miles of woods and farmland. We spent a lot of time traveling back and forth on the major highway that connected them. We'd all been traveling on it since we were little and knew it well. To my knowledge, it had never had a bad reputation or was considered dangerous. I certainly had never met anyone else who had never had a similar thing happen to them before or since. It was old and a little rough in places, but that is the status quo in small-town Texas. Most days, one or more of us would have been riding along with them, but for some reason, he was alone on this day. He had just left his girlfriend's house and was about 5 minutes into his commute when a flashing light caught his attention in the rearview mirror. He looked up and saw an old Jeep Cherokee flashing its headlights at him. He was going about 75, and the Jeep was closing in fast. He assumed the driver had an emergency and was trying to clear the road ahead of him. He changed lanes to allow the Jeep to speed ahead. However, when he did this, the Jeep also changed lanes. He was puzzled. Maybe the guy just misread my intentions, he thought. He sped up a bit and moved back over to his original lane. Once again, the Jeep did the same. He was unsure of what to do, and while he considered his options, the Jeep accelerated and rammed the back of his car. He came very close to losing control, but held firm. As you can imagine, he was freaking out. He did the only sensible thing he could think of and floored the gas pedal. The Honda Accord he was driving was well capable of outrunning the Jeep. Unfortunately, he moved just a tad too slow, and the Jeep rammed him again. To his credit, I'm not sure I would have been capable of maintaining control, but he did. By now, he was beginning to pull away, and this is where he made a major mistake. To his right was an exit off the highway. He had to know it wouldn't lead anywhere but to more empty land and woods. Perhaps he thought he'd tricked the Jeep's driver by making a quick exit. I could never get a clear answer from him. Either way, just before he was to pass the exit ramp, he made a quick cut across 2 lanes and left the highway. He thought he'd shaken a stalker, but the familiar shape of the Jeep was now out on his tail. He was running out of options, and he knew it. Now he was in an even worse situation. The access road was virtually invisible from the highway and was getting dark. If no one saw what was happening before, he was really screwed. Now, at the bottom of the hill, he blew through the stop sign and sped up the next hill. There was an entrance ramp coming up soon, and he planned to take it. The outskirts of town were close. There was no way the Jeep driver would continue the pursuit once they got into town. He was sure he'd be able to make some space if he could just get to the top. He did, but the Jeep proved a hair faster and rammed the back of the car one final time. This was the hardest hit so far and caused him to finally lose complete control. The force of the collision caused the car to leap forward and to the right. The right side of this road made a dramatic drop about 35 feet down into a creek. I could be overestimating the drop a little, but it was definitely pretty high. He remembers the car rolling over once, but he lost consciousness right after. The picture I saw in the paper showed the roof of the car actually caved in, the rear end smashed. It was resting on a precipice just inches from falling another 10 feet into the creek bed. A passing motorist happened to catch sight of his lights from the highway and called for help. Once they arrived, he was rushed to the hospital and remained there for a few days. His most serious injuries were a punctured lung along with a few other broken ribs, a broken collarbone, and a very bad concussion. The sprains and bruising weren't exactly minor themselves, but he did go on to make a full recovery. I'm sure most of you reading this right now are wondering one thing: why would someone try to kill a complete stranger? And here's where we get into a hazy area. According to my friend, he did not do anything to cause such extreme behavior, nor did he recognize the Jeep driver. Since I never heard of a person ever being accused, let alone charged for the crime, I have to use some deductive reasoning here. Is it possible a crazy man saw an opportunity to drive a complete stranger off the road? Yes, crazier stuff happens every day all around the world. I even know a pair of guys from the same town who often took advantage of weaker people when they saw a chance. Not only did one of them sucker punch a friend of mine, I actually had a run-in with both young men. Fortunately, I got away unscathed. If it was one of those guys, I can assure you they messed with the wrong guy one night and got their just desserts. That said, I don't think it was them. I am of the belief that my friend did or said the wrong thing to someone and then went all Frank Castle on him, if you get my drift. I was in the car with a guy who flipped off another driver and very nearly ended up being shot. Like I said, there's a lot of crazy folks out there. Maybe my friend did something similar and was punished for it. He wasn't the kindest of guys and could be arrogant. We've been estranged for a long time, and for all I know, he could be dead now. A victim of his own cockiness. I suppose automobiles are very dangerous machines that kill more people every year than really anything, and we just have to accept this because they're so important to our daily lives. Knowing that there are people out there willing to destroy their own property and possibly even arm themselves to get revenge, it truly does give me chills. I shouldn't have to tell anyone how stressful and uncertain the last 2 or 3 years have been. Countless people around the world have lost homes, businesses, and loved ones through no fault of their own. As the pandemic waned and the shutdowns lifted, I counted myself lucky not to be one of them. Perhaps it was my hubris, but the universe found a way to change that because of an older model car and a drunk driver. I was robbed of the most important person of my life. I wasn't sure if I'd make it, but with a lot of help from friends and others familiar with my loss, I've been able to see a future for myself without him. I'm sharing my experience in order to show others there is hope after such a great and immense loss. Alan and I married late. He had been reluctant to settle down after hearing horror stories of his friends' contentious divorces. I'd been married myself once before. This didn't instill much faith in his mind. I was over 30 and eager to start a family. Alan was well aware of this, but I put no pressure on him. He came to the decision that he didn't want to lose me and proposed. I was more than happy to accept. To be honest, I was afraid he'd call me on my plan and let me go. Fortunately, we both got what we wanted, and we were eager to move ahead together. We tried for a few years to get pregnant, but it never happened. My doctor suggested fertility treatments. Due to the cost, we chose to forego buying a new car, much needed, by the way, to pay for the procedures. We'd only managed to get one round before the pandemic struck. Our dreams seemed to grow less and less likely by the month, but we didn't quite lose hope just yet. As the summer of 2021 arrived, things in our area began to get back to some semblance of normalcy. Our favorite restaurant had just opened for sit-down customers again. Alan and I packed into my 20-year-old VW Golf and headed downtown. Dinner was just as fantastic as I remembered it. I was on cloud nine. Afterward, this was the moment at which life chose to present me with my greatest test. On our way back home, my VW began to have engine trouble. This wasn't anything new. My priorities were never on auto maintenance. In truth, the poor car had made it a lot longer than it should have. The lurching and jerking continued to get worse until the engine died completely. We coasted a few feet onto the outer shoulder and stopped. Alan called AAA, and we waited inside the car for a tow truck to arrive. We'd been sitting there for around 10 minutes when a highway patrolman showed up. Alan got out to talk to him. From what I could hear, he was doing a routine check to see if we needed any assistance. Our state is one of those that offers such services. Alan informed him of the situation, and they were making small talk when everything went sideways. Out of nowhere, I heard a massive crash. Instantly, I saw the patrol car hurtling toward the back of my Golf. My last memory was of the officer attempting to push Alan away from the direction of his oncoming vehicle. It was too late, unfortunately. Both men were killed on impact. I awoke some seconds later. Initially, I was unaware of my surroundings, but the smell of smoke pulled me back to reality. I could see through the windshield. I had been pushed another 20 yards or so down the shoulder. There was no overpowering pain. I cautiously stepped from the mangled remains of my car. The floodlights from the patrol car were still functioning, and I could see my way around. The patrol car had come to rest a few yards away in a field that ran alongside the shoulder. The car that had caused the crash sat a few feet behind it. Both Alan and the officers' bodies were scattered nearby. It was clear I could do nothing to help either of them. That's as far as I'm prepared to go on that front. I was taking in the horror of the scene when I heard a slurred shout from the rear car. I looked over and saw a middle-aged man stumbling out from the driver's side, and blood was pouring down his face. My instinct to help kicked in, and I ran over to help. But as I got closer, the smell of booze overpowered me. I flipped out. I attacked the guy. He had no idea what was going on. A couple of good Samaritans had arrived and had to pull me off of the drunk idiot. I broke down right there and then. A female paramedic quietly walked me over to the ambulance and helped me onto the gurney. While the paramedics did their work, I cried unlike I'd ever cried before. The doctors were amazed at my condition. Other than a lot of bruising to my chest and knees, I was unarmed. I spent the rest of the night in the ER and was let go later that next afternoon. The true power of losing Alan had not yet hit me completely. That would come after the funeral. And speaking of the funeral, I was happy to see how many people turned out to say goodbye. Many of them I'd never met. Despite some reservations, I also attended the officer's service. His family greeted me warmly, and we all had a good cry together. After all the chaos surrounding the wreck subsided, I was left alone to think. And this was when the weight of everything truly fell upon me. The man in which I tried so hard to create a family with was gone forever. I wouldn't leave the house for almost 4 months without the help of some awesome people. I would have probably starved to death. Only when a close friend convinced me to attend a grief counseling group was I able to regain some sense of sanity. Although it hasn't been that long, the group has helped me a lot. I'll be the first to admit I have a lot of progress to make. However, if you would have suggested 9 months ago that I could carry on without Alan, I would have probably spit in your face. It may be a trite cliche, but it really does appear that time can heal all wounds. The little part they neglect to add is that every severe wound leaves a scar behind. That scar may be an ill reminder of that past trauma to some. I prefer to see it as a memorial, a monument to a man who I will always love. This makes me smile, and a smile is never a bad thing.
I'm an icon, man. I'm a girl about a 10. I should fuck her in a bed.